so welcome to the press conference for Viceroy's House here at the competition at the Berlinale 2017. And I have wonderful guests. I'm going to introduce them to you, and I'm starting from your left. Please welcome the producer, Deepak, Nayar. Welcome to Berlin. And the actor who played G, Manish, Dayal. It's great to have you here. And the charming Gillian. Wonderful to have you here. Director and scriptwriter, Gurinder, Chadha. Welcome to Berlin. The man who played so convincing Lord Mountbatten, Hugh, Bonneville. Wonderful to have you. And this is wonderful. Huma, Qureshi, who played Alia. Welcome to Berlin. And the scriptwriter, Berges. Welcome. I think there are always some questions, so you first. Yeah, please. Get the right on your side.
Congratulations, everybody. Stephen Schaefer here for the Boston Herald. Gurinder, I wonder how long you've been planning to make this, what turns out to be an extremely personal movie. And for you, do you see this as connected in any way with Downton Abbey in its appeal and its sort of elements of nostalgia and English Empire?
Well, we started working on the script 7 years ago, so it's been a long process for us. It's a difficult subject, as you can imagine. It's a pretty traumatic period for anybody who's connected with it, wherever you are in the world. And I had grown up in the shadow of the partition. Growing up in England, I didn't really have a homeland as such. My parents came to England when I was a baby, and I myself was born in East Africa, part of the British Empire. But growing up in England, often when people would be prejudiced and say, go back to where you come from, it was always very confusing for someone like me, because my homeland was now in another country called Pakistan. So I grew up in the shadow of the partition, if you like, throughout my whole life. And it was only after I did a BBC documentary of Who Do You Think You Are, where I actually went back to my ancestral home for the first time, that I actually realised just how important it was for me to tell this story. And in the BBC documentary, I'm quite belligerent about being in Pakistan initially. And in the car, I actually, on the way there, I say, I refuse to call this country anything but pre-partitioned India, because I'm so emotional about it. But when I get to my grandfather's house in Gillian, and all the village arrived to help me find the house, and all the Pakistanis gather round and say, welcome, you're our daughter, this is your home, this is your village, you belong here. It was an incredibly emotional moment for me. Sorry, I'm looking for cough. And then when we finally found my grandfather's house, I was so happy to see this beautiful house in the courtyard with Jaipur carvings and beautifully made with a lot of love. My grandfather built this house with a lot of love. I felt for a moment that I had touched a piece of my ancestry. But within a minute, once I met all the people there were 5 families living in that house who themselves had all been refugees from India to Pakistan. And that was when the reality really hit me of what it must have been like to become a refugee overnight. And just as my grandmother had packed it up and leave with her children, these families had arrived. So I wanted to do something that was about the people's partition. What actually happened during those months leading up to the decision of partition and the effect on ordinary people like my family. And that was the reason I wanted to make the film.
As some of you will know, not only am I an extremely modest actor, I also have an extraordinary range. And so to be able to go from playing an Earl in Downton Abbey to a Viscount in Viceroy's house really showed you the breadth of my extraordinary
Hello, my name is Christine from Canada, another colony. Congratulations for making very strong character, female characters also. In Hindi, when you say Namaste, you say I salute the God in you. And I wish people in India would start saying I salute the goddess in you. It might change something in 5,000 years old mentality. The question I have is, historically, when people look back now, if England had not promised to Jinnah that he would give us Pakistan back in 1945, do you feel, is there, people making researches about this story in India, do they feel that things would have been different?
I think partition has happened, and to talk about what might have happened, what is not the question. That was never the intent of the movie. The movie was always about telling a story, just like Gurinder's family. My family also migrated from Pakistan. And it was always about telling stories and telling that even though the partition might have happened, we are still the same people. So whether it got divided into two countries doesn't really matter. It's more about people coming together. And that's the message of this movie.
I think one of the things in the film that, which I'm very hopeful about is that there are links. Punjabi is spoken widely amongst all Punjabis, whether they're from India or Pakistan. Our food, our fashion, culturally there are a lot of links that still unite us, I think. And particularly in England, I have friends who are from India and Pakistan and everywhere in the world, so I don't see those barriers in the same way today. And also, I think in the film, we have a song by Hans Raj, and it's a Punjabi song, and it's the first song when they go to the engagement party, and he's singing the song, and the song is about a lover saying, "Come, let me take you travelling to all the cities." And he mentions 6 cities in the song, and he says, "Jal Delhi Sheh Delhi, Jal Multan Sheh Multan," which is now Pakistan. He mentions 6 cities which are all now divided, but at that time when that Punjabi song was written, that was all one country. So I did that really on purpose to show how the strength is there in cultural ties. We don't have to follow those boundaries. Culturally, I think there's more that connects us still.
Thank you. My name is Atif Baloj, and I'm from Deutsche Welle Radio, representing South Asia Department specifically. So, first of all, congratulations to make that very important film, specifically at the time when both nations have just celebrated the 70th Independence Day. Coming back to my question, I have just watched that movie, and I just want to know that that movie was particularly, around, no doubt it was Viceroy House, and it has to be around that characters, but the empathy and sympathies which Lord Mountbatten's family had got at that time, it was exaggerated to some extent. And the second question is that Gandhi's indifferent attitude toward partition, though we have read there were certain examples, but like that, again, characterization were exaggerated, what I guess. So what's your take on these two things?
Well, I think when you make a film about a particular historical episode, you have to do your research, which we did. Paul and I, worked at talking to many experts at the time. We talked to people who were alive at the time. We talked to people who were actually in Viceroy's house at the time. and also read many texts. One has to interpret events because we weren't there, you weren't there, people weren't there. As the film says, history is written by the victors. History is always interpreted and written from a particular point of view. In this film, what we've done is we've gone back, looked at everything, and come up with our own interpretation of what we think happened in those weeks leading up to partition. Now, by this point, Gandhiji had been very marginalised. He was old news. Nehru himself had moved on. Congress Party had moved on. And on the actual day, Gandhi was obviously always against any kind of division, and we show that. But on the day when the actual document was signed, it was very important that we state that on that day, Gandhiji had taken a vow of silence. So that was his way of objecting and not being complicit in what was happening. And actually on the day of independence, he refused to take part in any celebrations. He was asleep in Calcutta, and when a maid went to wake him, the other said no. He said, there's nothing to celebrate. So we showed that because that was the truth. In terms of the Mountbattens, I think that many people blame Mountbatten for the division, and many people feel that it was his fault and he took the decision for partition. And I think all the evidence we saw showed the opposite. So we wanted to show that actually that was not correct, and although it's called the Mountbatten Plan, and he's always been blamed for it, actually there was a far bigger game at play, which is the geopolitics of the time, which are not too dissimilar to the geopolitics played today in that part of the world. And Mountbatten really ended up being a puppet at that time and being used by people precisely because he wasn't an astute politician. He was a very charming naval officer who perhaps was a little out of his depth in terms of the cut and thrust of empire politics.
And the starting point in the script was to look at, as Gurinder said, a lot of times Mountbatten as an individual gets blamed for everything. But the starting point was to say, actually, that decision was a political act. There was a British strategic decision about dividing the country. And what we wanted to do is show everyone's point of view and how everyone, in some ways, the staff downstairs, the politicians upstairs, they all suffered from that decision. The decision to divide the country so quickly had huge ramifications and was the largest mass migration of people ever. 14 million people made refugees overnight. So it was really trying to look at that in a way that was a much bigger decision about all the different players, rather than just putting the blame on one person.
However, we do show that Mountbatten was responsible for bringing the date forward, and that was perhaps, led to some of the problems. But that was his decision. So, in a way, I hope what the film shows is a series of blunders, really, that led to the disaster, as well as some careful political manoeuvring for bigger interests in the back. And really, that is happening today, But I wanted to show from the perspective of my grandmother and my aunt who died as the consequences of these kinds of bigger geopolitical decisions.
Thank you.
Hi, Chadha. Question for Gurinder and Paul. When Richard Attenborough made Gandhi, I think the Pakistanis were not very happy with it, and then they made another version of the Jinnah story. How do you think this, it's more in terms of the research that you guys did when you wrote the script, how do you think people in India and Pakistan will relate to this story 70 years later? We keep, repeating the story again and again. It's so important for who we are, really. Did you give some thought to that in terms of, whether to be balanced as such?
Well, I think it's a very, very important point to make that this is a film, made by a British Punjabi. And that statement carries a lot with it. I don't think the same film could have been made by an Indian from India or a Pakistani from Pakistan. It's a very unique historical and social point of view from someone who has grown up in Britain with a British sensibility of storytelling, but with a beating Punjabi heart, whose ancestral homeland is in pre-partition India, which is now Pakistan. So in the way that I am linked in all different ways, the film also tries to tell the points of view from every point of view. Even, for example, with sadly Omburi, who's left us, but Omburi's character in many ways manifested how we were trying to balance and humanize everybody. Because a lot of the films that I've seen made from India about partition demonize the other side, And I think for me, it was very important to say this is what happened, hold some of the British establishment accountable, and say, right, that's what happened then. Now, the more that we continue to have conflict between us, the more it plays into the hands of those who want that conflict, because it's about divide and rule. So for me, the message for Indians and Pakistanis is really to say we have to move on. This is the time now, this is what happened, we have to move on, because we're playing into the hands of the divide and rule brigade if we continue along that path. But it was important for me that I should be able to sit and enjoy and watch this film with an audience in Britain, in Delhi and in Lahore. I wanted that.
Thank you. Now on Berges.
Hi. I live in Berlin, okay. Perhaps Huma, she is from Pakistan, but she lives in London, so I don't know. I'm talking about Qureshi, so okay. And this is one kind of partition romantic story by Bollywood, okay. And there is no story in fact. That means you have a Bengal partition problems there is nothing, and when Gandhiji was in Calcutta, that means in Ballyhot at that time, he can't find it. And that means he was avoiding the ceremony, but he was there. And the whole Bengal, it was the most important for this partition. Yeah. And all these politicians also from there are from Bengal. Yeah. Whatever it is Congress, it was a Bengal or Muslim League, also they are from, and there is one mistake, I think. Not 1943, it was Fazil Haq 25, AKM Fazil Haq, at that time he was the Prime Minister of West Bengal. And he said it should be Pakistan. He mentioned the first time, then Sarwardi was there, 1938. That's the story. I'm sorry.
No, I think when you write a script, it's always tricky with a feature film, because there are so many stories and there's so many different angles we could have covered.
There is a lot of this small, a lot of stories there. You're not continuing the whole stories. That's the problems there for everyone. We are from India, we are from Bangladesh, or we are from Pakistan, so we know all these problems. My father, my parents, they came from India, and we know all these things, and we live in Bangladesh, we are living in Bangladesh. Now it's all these things, and the relatives, they are also in Pakistan or in India.
The way we showed that in the film was that we made sure all the characters were from different places. So, Dilip was from Punjab, the character of Mohsin, he was from Bengal. And in the beginning of the film, you hear a little exchange where Mohsin says to G, you must know your place, you may be new here. And Dilip says, you Bengalis are always causing trouble, and he says, you Punjabis are always causing trouble. So we showed because our conceit was the house, And we weren't making a film about the whole of India and the whole history of India. It was within the house. So within the conceit of the house, we showed downstairs the different storylines and the different characters.
And we hope that by using the house as a microcosm, the story will resonate in much larger ways. I mean, it's very significant for Gurinder and the world premieres in Berlin. So it's a city that knows about being partitioned. And you look at the film in the time of Syria and Trump and Brexit in some ways and all these other things, and you hope that a very specific story will resonate in a much larger way for an international audience.
Sorry, I think that for me now, sitting here, when we started making the film, there was no talk of Brexit. There was no talk of somebody like Trump ever being president. There was nothing. We were just 7 years ago. It was a very different world when we started making the film. So now, at the other end, even when we were editing, even when we were shooting the film, Syria was happening. The day we were shooting these scenes with 1,000 extras as refugees, we felt very bad because we were shooting these refugees, but it was that morning that the little boy had been found washed up on the beach. And so we were looking at these news images on our phones, and here we were with refugees 70 years later. So it was getting very real for us, what we were shooting, in terms of the resonance for today. And then when we were editing the film in London, my editor was Italian, of an area, and suddenly Brexit happened, something none of us ever imagined would happen. Suddenly we were dealing with our own partition in London, and my editor was distraught because he was married to an Englishwoman, had 2 children, didn't know what was going to happen to him, his family, his future. And so once again, we were living, the film was alive again today. And then now, today, here we are, releasing the film at a time where the politics of hate and division are so prevalent and are defining not just America at the moment, but here in Europe, in France, in Germany, in Britain, the rise of populism, the rise of the right. I mean, today, I feel this film is a timely reminder of what happens when you promote hate and division and start to criminalise a group of people. The end result is violence and death, and history tells us that. So here's another story. I mean, history has always taught us these lessons, but here's another story that not many people in the world know about, to remind us once again of our responsibility, to learn from history.
Thank you. That's one on the left.
I'm Nayar, African Refugee News. Thank you for what you said just now. But when you come to the Berlinale, you want to see a film, but then it tends to be political. But this was a beautiful film, a beautiful love story. And when we talk about people that cannot defend themselves because they are dead, you must know this man. He foresaw what is going to happen in India if there was no partition. The Muslims, the Hindus would crash. He saw this also in Ethiopia, in Eritrea, and he was against, this was later, he was against the connection between Ethiopia and Eritrea because of 2 different people. So I think he did a very good thing to do, because I lived in Sudan in the 60s, I don't know. And there were Pakistani and there were Indians. And they were in class, they were sitting Pakistani and Indian. And I could not understand it because I was a young boy. And the teacher used to give us homeworks to the Indians to write about Pakistan and to the Pakistani to write about India. I tell you, in 2 years, we had parties together. So I think the people are missing something, friendship, understanding, and your film will give a lot. Thank you.
Thank you. At the time, in that period, in 1947, partition was in the air. It was a policy. You had Palestine, you had Cyprus, you know, obviously India, I mean, and then here, as Paul said, here in Berlin, you know, it's a systematic tool to divide us. And the good side of what is happening for me is that people are rising up, people are being politicised, young people are being politicised. So I hope, as you say, you know, people can see beyond this idea to divide us.
Thank you. There's one on the right.
Who? My name is Alka Eich from Afrika Z, and I also write for several German film media. I like the film. Somebody came out and said it's, in German we say plakativ, you know, for somebody it was a little bit too simple. But I do think it's so important to have a film that really reaches to a broad, you know, public. And I think this film achieved that. And I was very touched. And I was very frustrated. And I keep trying to say, I mean, who are we as humankind to be so stupid and things repeat and just continue? And we have India, we have with Afghanistan, in Africa, it's like so awful. And so what do you think, where is the hope? And I also would like to congratulate the main actors and Manish, Dayal and Huma, Qureshi. What did that trigger with you to get into this story and this reality, to see that it was part of a bigger plan, which actually seems to be confirmed, that it was not Mr. Mountbatten who was so stupid to do it, but it was a bigger plan, as we have bigger plans nowadays. And Gillian Anderson, your role was fantastic, but it's also this role, the woman who is so humanistic, and the woman is hiding this powerful man, and what are your stance also today, political-wise? And I mean, because the links to today times, to our times, are so obvious. I would like to have some sort of statements from the actors as well, and it would be really great to hear something from them.
Who wants to start?
I think that I did not know a lot about this history before I started working on the film at all, and I grew up between America and the UK, and it's certainly not something that was addressed in my American high school studies. But you know, in honouring the script and wanting to bring a semblance of truth to who this woman was, obviously did research. But what was fascinating to me in the work that I did was how they, you know, from this story, how they applied themselves to the role that they were being asked to serve, and how extraordinarily out of their depth they were at the time in this, you know, completely ridiculously opulent house with 500 servants, you know, in the middle of what would soon become one of the greatest atrocities in history. And you know, I think the conversations that I had within the script between the Mountbattens about what on earth to do, how to move forward, how the patience that Edwina implores Dicky to apply, etc., are all you know, show the kind of lack of power, I guess, you know, the time when everybody is leaving, where Britain is removing the forces, and the governors are all going back, and there's nobody left to support the decisions that they are making, and here are these two people stuck in this role, in this house. It's such a sad tale of the end of, you know, of colonialism. And is there anything else?
I would just want to say that I think for all that it is a story that shows epic decisions and epic tragedy, human tragedies, ultimately for all that bleakness that is alluded to, it does come down and bring into focus the simplicity of human lives, and the fact that at the very end, in this most unlikely of endings, which was actually one of the certifiable facts of the film, of two people finding each other in a refugee camp long after the events had taken place, and that actually turning out through fiction to become the fact of Gurinder's grandparents, I think brings it into focus that despite this backdrop of seismic shifts both in humanitarian need and indeed shifts of geographical humanitarian location, there are seeds of hope, and I think even in these ghastly times that we're living in, let's cling on to those moments of two people finding each other and building a future.
Well, I just want to say this, that the partition is something where, as an Indian or a Pakistani, whether you're living in the country or outside, is something that affects everyone very, very deeply. And everyone has a backstory in terms of a family member that they've lost, or property, or whatever, something that they've lost, and the scars are still very deep. So much so that even now, the relationship between both the countries, no policy, no decision can be made without a reference to the partition, the scars that has left behind. That's how much the subcontinent really has been affected by it. However, having said that, I mean, the film is, of course, one part is actually what happened with the Mountbattens coming to India, and the politics and the history behind it. And of course, there's a fictional story between Manish and I, which is a human story, which is a fairy tale romance we all want to take back with us. And I'm glad that through that we leave the audience with some hope that in this world which is increasingly becoming right-wing and pushing the other out, is becoming about us and them. We're giving them a message of hope and humanity and love by the end of it. So that's what I guess I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I would say that they touched on most things, but I would say that Jeet, my character, represents for me a very relatable idea of youth and what it means to be young and idealistic, especially as an American right now. Jeet isn't going to. Jeet's the kind of guy that wants to not accept what's happening around him. He is an idealist, and he's hopeful that all of these things will pass. And I think that how it is relatable to me as an American right now is that we are experiencing what many of us like to call the resist movement, which is being, and I was talking to Hugh about this last night, it's about being active and actively protesting and actively working to sort of oppose something that we disagree with and celebrate sort of inclusion. And I think that that's how my character Jeet relates to me, and how I think it's so applicable today and also for our film.
Thank you. I know that we all would love to go on talking about that movie, but we have time scheduled to follow. I'm very sorry, but thank you very much for your questions, and thank you very much.